Hello there, wherever you are in the world, whatever time zone you're in, welcome to the live stream. Thanks for joining us. In the wake of the Monaco Grand Prix, in the build up to the Spanish Grand Prix, the Barcelona-Catalunya Grand Prix, we must now obviously remember we have two Grand Prix in Spain, and later in the year in September we'll have the Spanish Grand Prix, so-called, and in Madrid, back in the hometown of Jarama. Anyway, that's another story. Welcome to the live stream. As I say, lots to talk about post Monaco, going into Spain. I think the other bit of news that we've touched upon already, I've touched upon with Cameron, and you can see on the channel right now, I've got the full length chat I did with Cameron on the Monday. I was just trying something, and it's just to see what that cam chat looks like from my end. And you hear Cameron's dulcet tones, of course, asking the questions, and there's me fidgeting around when he's talking, and then you got the whole thing. So it should be quite fun to watch that, hopefully. But we did talk then about the new rulings, which are, I don't know. Well, no doubt you'll be talking about it, but the benchmark engine, the most powerful engine, power unit in Formula One, internal combustion engine specifically, is the Red Bull powertrain Ford. Brilliant. And I'm kind of pleased in a way. Obviously they're not, because that means they don't get any opportunity for upgrades at the moment. But given the number of people on the live streams last year that were saying, oh, Max is going to be in trouble, the Red Bull powertrains, apparently the rumors are terrible, it's going to be really slow. And I have to say, I kept saying, only because I know a few of the people there, and I know the people their experience and how they were going to put it together, I'd say, well, I don't think they are going to be bad. I think they're going to be pretty good. And when you think of who they're competing against, Honda in particular, I think they've done an amazing job. So let's hear it for Red Bull Powertrain. No upgrades allowed. It's a massive victory for them. Anyway, we'll get on to that, no doubt. As I say, let's get on with the questions. And the first is from, what a surprise, Sarosh. Thank you so much, Sarosh, one of our members, one of our regulars. Absolutely brilliant. Peter, Leclerc was able to keep in touch with Hamilton with the hard tyres. Yeah, absolutely. Within the 5 seconds he needed to be. Looking at his onboards, he somehow found a sweet spot to drive the car well despite the issues, emotions leading him to crash the car. Yeah, I think, I don't know how quickly they were going at that point. You can never draw too many conclusions about Monaco race day in terms of how well the car's balanced, how well it's going. I don't think Charles felt a lot better on the hards than he did on the mediums. Obviously, they were fresh tyres, and I guess he would have had a bit of a boost knowing that Lewis had got that 5-second penalty, which was for 0.1 of a kilometre per hour over the 60-kilometre-hour speed limit. Can you believe it? And as I said in the video after the race, there's definitely something weird going on there. I don't think we'll ever get to the bottom of it because it's an FIA thing, any more than we'll get to the bottom of what happened at the start procedure in Canada. So, I think we just have to accept it, which obviously Ferrari did. But maybe, thinking about it even more, maybe because it was only 0.1, they thought, well, this is going to be an arguable thing. We're going to have to take this to the stewards afterwards. So maybe that's the reason they didn't keep Charles out there and allow him easily to get his P2. And they brought him in, put him on the softs, and we all know what happened after that, as you correctly say. But when he was behind Lewis, there was no reason for Charles to be emotional on the hard tyre. Once the penalty had been announced, there's no reason to be emotional or anything other than just calm and enjoying himself, knowing that he had P2 in the bag. And it all went wrong, of course, when A, they brought him in, and then B, he went off. So I know he is looking to make brake changes. I think they're going more in the carbon industry direction for Spain, the sort of Lewis direction. Personally, I've got my doubts about that, only because it may sound very facile, and who am I to say this in the wake of all the engineering data they have at Ferrari, but I think it's actually quite difficult to blame the brakes when you haven't got a lot of grip anyway. And if the brakes were that bad, why didn't he talk about that after Canada? And he's talking about it freely now, so there was obviously no reason not to. It just didn't occur to him, I think. And now he's putting 2 and 2 together and maybe getting 5. We'll see. It's always a bit of a rocky road when you start adopting your teammates, a fundamental thing from a teammate, like brakes, for example, as we saw with Alonso and at McLaren in 07. And it ended in tears in the end. He went, it had to be the brakes, and so he went to Hitco's. And anyway, that wasn't the reason. Obviously, the season fell apart for him, but it was that. Well, I fell apart. I mean, he was absolutely right there, but I mean, he didn't win the championship, did he? So, that was something that I think we need to just, it'd be interesting to see how. I think Charles will go well in Spain, come what may. I mean, he knows that place. The car will be pretty good there in general, and I think he'll be okay. But I'm not convinced about the whole brake thing, and I'm still absolutely perplexed as to what Ferrari were thinking. Continuing, I've never seen him this angry and annoyed. This is Leclerc. He was like, you guys have to take the blame. Yeah, well, as I said, he had P2 in the bag when he was on the hard tyres, Lewis having got that penalty, and it was just a question of cruising around within 5 seconds, which he did. And then it all went wrong. Ferrari basically took it away from him. He said, oh, well, no, we're going to bring you in now. And that was it. And Lewis served his penalty. And because it was a safety car situation, basically the penalty was nullified anyway. So, yeah, no wonder he was annoyed. And I was surprised, actually, how relatively polite he was after the race when he was doing a few interviews. And he even smiled a bit, didn't he? I mean, imagine if that was Nigel at Ferrari in that situation with Prost in the other car, what he would have done. It would have been fisticuffs, I think, after the race. Another one by Sarosh. Peter, Antonelli outqualified Russell by 0.5! Exclamation mark. Yeah, I know. It is unbelievable. This is Mansell Prost stuff at Silverstone 1990. Considering how close the cars are today, would it be similar to Senna 88 Monaco, Mansell in 90? Yeah, you've actually made the point. 90 Silverstone, both to Prost. Antonelli was sublime like a musician. Yeah, totally agree. And the better job he did as the weekend gathered pace, the more George seemed to get flustered and not deliver. And it all culminated in, an unpardonable error, really, for a driver of his experience and quality to hit the white line coming out of the pit lane at Monaco. I mean, as I said at the time, I think that gives us a pretty clear insight into George's mindset right now. And it's amazing, isn't it? What the teammate will do to you. Gone are the days of, oh, I'm so happy for Kimi. Wonderful for the team. Isn't he coming along well? Isn't he a great guy? We don't hear a lot of that from George now, do we? It's, you can read it like a book. I think the writing was on the wall when Kimi began to display, beginning of last year, how good he was on slow corners and how he was getting on top of that. And George wasn't responding. He was just continuing to drive the same way. And and he's getting his results and getting this and doing the George Russell thing. But he wasn't doing what, in reality needed to be done if his engineers and the people around him advising him were actually watching what was going on and looking at the way George does drive on slow corners compared with Kimi and his relative spikiness in the car compared with Kimi. It could have been, he could have done a lot of work on that last year behind the scenes and quite clearly didn't. And for all the things we hear and read and look at on social media about how the drivers keep so fit and they're always losing weight and, keeping everything physically right on top and they're doing all this sim work. What we never saw and what we never see are drivers actually working on their real problems, which is George working on his spikiness, on turning in earlier. And, and it applies to other drivers as well in other teams. I mean, it applies, got to say it, I know there's a big sort of fan club out there now for Checo Perez, but it applies to Checo because that guy, massively talented, massively naturally talented, but he never really learned how to drive the car with understeer in the same way that Max could. And he never really dealt with the variables in the way Max could. Why? Because he doesn't have the same sweet spot. He doesn't have the same ability. Well, I think he does have the ability. He just never honed it into something that was manageable with all the different things, the pressure, the variables, the changing regulations and what you've got to ask from a car. I mean, Max adapts to all that stuff pretty quickly. And Antonelli would as well. Not that he hasn't been around long enough to display that, but for sure he would. And in a microcosm, we saw that in Monaco. We saw how, despite the pressure, the building pressure of qualifying, and it's a huge pressure, it just builds up and builds up at Monaco, doesn't it? The track's getting quicker all the time. You do FP3, then the Formula 2 cars come out, and the Porsche car, and it's a bit of a delay, and then you get finally into qualifying, and you do your lap, and it's only Q1, you got to do it again. And so it builds up and builds up, and he was just so resilient to all that pressure. Because, as I said to Cam, he has this innate, not innate, it's just a perfect feel for the car and the surface of the road, and that means he's got perfect harmony between his rates of input and all the dynamic energies and weights that he has to manage around the car on a lap. Everything is in harmony. That's why it looks so spelt on the camera. And that's why Max always looks so spelt. That's why Prost always looks so spelt. That's why Nigel Mansell, we didn't see that many onboards with Nigel in those days, but that's why he always looked be on top of the car. And Nigel would come in, nostrils flaring, everything very, very, it was unbelievably dangerous. And I was, bravery was a major thing, but it wasn't really. I mean, that was Nigel being Nigel. The reality was Nigel was pin sharp, very sensitive, and the car was just flat on the road 99% of the time. So that's what we're seeing with Antonelli. Anyway, Sarosh, I was watching onboards of Leclerc in 24, Verstappen 23, Antonelli 26 pole laps in Monaco. Kimi looked the smoothest. I'd like to say Max and Leclerc looked similar. Kimi was like no load on the car, like Prost. Yeah, I do think that relative to its opposition and within itself, that Mercedes probably has more inherent grip and balance than a Red Bull in 23 which would have had a bit of bouncing. They would have been compromising a little bit on the ride height. Yes, it was a good car, but that's only because the others were even were not good at all. Leclerc 24. Yeah, I mean a Leclerc lap on in a very good car compared with an Antonelli lap in a very good car, and a Max lap, to be honest. I think all three of them would look very, very similar. Of course, there are always going to be differences. That's the beauty of Formula One. And this is the real heart of what Formula One is all about. It's these great drivers all performing at that level, the soft touch, harmonious rate of input level. But they're all doing it slightly differently every time. I mean, I was eulogizing about Kimi through Rascasse and also Max over the weekend, but they were slightly different. They were slightly different. I would say Max was coming in just a tad earlier than Kimi, just a tad, not much. I mean, the difference compared with the difference between Kimi and George, it was like, that and that. So, but there are always differences. And yeah, you know, Kimi looked the smoothest. I'm not quite sure what that means really. What is smoothness? Because you can be smooth with massive opposite lock if you want to be. Think Gilles Villeneuve, think Ronnie Peterson. But yeah, I know what you're saying. But all of them characteristically do not shadow box on the steering, and that's the thing that a lot of the judgments I think are made from the onboard look. I wish they would just keep that one camera angle of the steering you can see with the track in front of you, and I think it's a DNA characteristic. I mean, they just don't shadow box because it's wasteful and it's unnecessary. They're only putting in inputs when they need to, and sometimes it's a lean. It's actually a lean like that. It's not actually a turn, and it's all to do with the suppleness of the elbows and the arms, the forearms, and they're feeling the car. Everything is happening in real time relative to the dynamic weights going through the car, because they're just feeling the surface of the road. And all the great drivers, even Senna, who I say even Senna, especially Senna, even though he was driving in a very different way to Max and Antonelli and Charles and Nigel Mansell and Carlos Reutemann, would nonetheless still be incredibly soft. Jarno Trulli actually was too in the initial steering inputs from straight line to initial lateral load. Nobody better than Jarno Trulli. Jarno wasn't great on handling understeer. That's another subject. And he didn't develop a huge sweet spot that made him resilient. But it's all about that softness. And George doesn't have that softness. And he could have worked on that. And maybe he still will, to his credit. Yeah, let's hope he does. I think he's still got Rob Wilson's number. Ronnie Way. Hi, Peter. Hope you rested enough. Yeah, I'm fine, buddy. Yeah. I've got off to the physio again today. Got this really good guy down in Murcia who he's doing a good job. It's my shoulder and my knee. Dexter did quite a job on me. Not Dexter. I mean, it was that ridiculous dog that he chased, and I don't blame him for doing that. And he went one way, I went the other, and the concrete path took the impact. But it's amazing. I'm feeling, the knee pain virtually gone now, so it's brilliant. Anyway, Ronnie Way. Hi, Peter. Hope you rested enough. How do you see the Barcelona circuit for the top four teams, with Red Bull bringing a fresh engine for Max? It's an all-rounder track, mix of high and low speed. Thanks. Yeah, I think we'll see quite a lot of new engines. I'm sure Lando's got a new one as well, new power units. I'm not really on top of all that stuff. I kind of take it for granted. But yeah, I don't think a fresh engine necessarily makes the same difference as it did in the old days. But yeah, there's that. Then Barcelona, I think it's a great circuit, a great racetrack. And I think we haven't seen the Mad Ring yet, but I think when you put the two up against one another, Barcelona will be a fabulous racetrack. It'll look even better, and the Mad Ring will be a sort of TV special with a rather pointless bank corner that doesn't really test drivers' ability or skill, but looks wonderful on TV. And Barcelona it will I think look better as a result to the real racers out there. Corners, I've always loved 2 to 3, because 3 is a long right hander that leads onto a straight, so it's a very important corner, and it may well be flat, but that doesn't mean to say, oh well, it's flat. That's no problem. The more you can take it flat and reduce the lateral load going through the car at critical points when it's accelerating, the better job you're going to do on that straight. And that you're going to do that if you manipulate the car correctly in 2 and you come out of 2 by not having to go too far to the left for 3. So you want to come out obviously on the right hand side, but then just move across to the middle of the road, no more, and then get your lovely entry into 3. And if you can do that, then you're going to have a big advantage, I think, on the exit at the end of the straight going into 4. I think 4 is a fairly annoying corner. I don't think it differentiates a lot between a Max and a Carlos. And the next corners are all what they would call technical, I think, fairly straightforward. The next great corner is 9, which is the very quick uphill right-hander, blind brow right-hander, with potential for a lot of crosswind if the wind is blowing, which hits the back of the car going in. And that's why you sometimes see cars just suddenly going off there. And that's a great corner. That'll be an interesting corner, I think, in a George Antonelli comparison. I'm sure in benign weather conditions, Kimi will be no different from George through there. If the wind starts to blow, maybe George will have an advantage going in there, I think. Maybe. Only because he's George, And Kimi will probably, I don't know, maybe not. He's so good now, isn't he? I mean, it's all the different things going into Massenet every lap in Monaco. The marbles growing on the outside. There would always be a bit of debris during those. He was just always brilliant through there. So I'm kind of taking it back already. I'm backpedaling on that. I think Kimi will be very good through 9. 10, it's an interesting corner, 10, because it's the end of the long back straight. And it's very easy, I think, if you're on a good lap there, to brake too late into 10. And that basically messes you up through the next kink and then up into I guess it's 12, the right-hander, that long right-hander. So 10 is a corner and there is no reward really for braking late into 10. It's because it's not much afterwards. It's just an acceleration burst and then you're into the next one. So the key there always is to make sure whatever is your braking point, that is your braking point. Even if you're purple on the first sector, you don't then let the blood rush come and try to brake a little bit later. You just say, right, got that in the bank, just do the rest of the lap now as I should, and then you'll be fine. Bruno Senna, take note, all those years ago when he blew what would have been a very good qualifying lap in the Williams. And then, long right-hander, sort of Sebastian Vettel speciality, classic V corner. Be fascinating to see how Kimi does that corner, actually. He'll be going in early, I suspect, but he might do a bit of Ving there. We'll see. That'll be interesting. I think George will do the sort of standard thing and just try to get on the power as soon as possible. Then you got a bit of a piff-paff, as the French would say. And then the last corner's pretty good now. I think they're still accelerating through it, though. All things being equal, tyres and everything else accelerating through it. So it's not as if it's, whoa, it's not as if we're going into Chapel Curve at Silverstone here. But it's good that we've got that last fast corner. Nice circuit. The Catalonians are making a phenomenal effort to upgrade as much as they can in the face of the competition from Madrid. And they've done a really good job. They've got Silverstone-like transport facilities in place now to pick people up from the station, buses and all that stuff. There's always a bit of a schlep trying to get in and out there. And I think they've done a very good job on their fan zone and all that stuff. They've made all that a lot more sanitary. So I think it'll be a very good Grand Prix, actually. It's easy to say that, but I think it will be. And I think it'll be an interesting race. I think Red Bull will be quite quick there in the sense that they'll be a lot better than they were at the start of the year. I can't see Max really fighting the two Merc drivers for the pole. Famous last words. I can see him on the second row, maybe. I can see him being somewhere near the Ferraris. And the big question, I guess, is whether McLaren can finally get their finger out and do something. And if they do, again, it's hard to see them blowing Ferrari and Red Bull away right now, but they might have a very good car based on how good they have been around Barcelona, obviously, last year. So we'll see. We'll see how that's an interesting one. And I think it'd be a fascinating one, the George Antonelli thing. I don't see Antonelli being slower than George there. I mean, circumstances may come up where George gets a great weekend and Kimi doesn't, obviously. That can happen with two guys in equal cars. But I think George's best chance to blow Kimi away might be Austria, which is just a sort of, rather ridiculous circuit where anything can happen. And Kimi's mindset for Austria should be, if I can finish on the podium there, great result for me. But he'll be looking for a win in Barcelona for sure. And he's quite capable of doing it, no question. Marina Nora Rodriguez Ruiz. Hi, Peter. George said that the 26 cars don't suit his driving style. Well, they suit Kimi's. Do you agree with that? No, of course I don't. I think that's just, that's one of the things people say when they're getting blown away. And it's completely, I've put it this way. Have you ever heard George say that before? No. And he's only saying it because he doesn't know what else to say. He doesn't know what else to look at. And it's nothing to do with these cars. It's to do with how well Kimi is now driving. He's honed all his natural talent. He's got softer inputs than George across the board. He's got a feel for short corners across the board. He's got a great feel for use of curbs and change of direction across the board, by which I mean from one type of circuit to another. Whereas George is a bit spikier, very brave, longer corners, harder on tyres now. It's the first time in George's career, really, that he's in a bit of tyre management trouble. He's always been very, very good on tyre management, but Kimi's showing him up. And that's nothing to do with these cars. Nothing to do with it. If anything, these should suit George, because some of the things Kimi can do with the rear brakes, he's not able to do, like Max. But he could at Monaco. But Kimi was doing a pretty good job with him in Canada and Miami and places like that too, wasn't he? And he will do a good job in Barcelona, where they're going to have to do a lot more, brake energy harvesting under braking. And that should help George. Bottom line. So that, it just doesn't it's just ludicrous. It just shows again, it's just a highlight into his mindset that he's thinking, oh, it must be these cars. What about these cars? We know that the braking thing actually would help you rather than hinder you. It actually detracts from Kimi's ability. So that's a good thing for George. What else is there that is hurting his style of driving? Nothing. It's a very good race car. It's the best race car in the field. So, it just doesn't make sense. And as I say, that's just George being a human being and saying, well, basically, I don't know what's going on. And it's because he didn't do his homework enough when Kimi joined. He didn't learn enough from Kimi and watch the way he was driving and improve and take his own level up 2 or 3 notches. And he's still at the same level that he was when Kimi joined the team. And sadly, when he was with Lewis, we now know even more that Lewis never really pushed him into that. And Lewis wasn't driving like 21 Lewis when he was with George, because by then Lewis had all these shell shocks going on, and then he had the bouncing Merc, and he was just driving in a very different way just to get the tires to work, to make sure he wasn't too shocked by anything the back end was going to do into a corner. So there you go, Marina Nora Rodriguez. And you were right, Charles will try a brake configuration requested by Lewis. These brake inconsistencies deprived us from some Leclerc Monaco magic. Well, did they? I'm not sure they did. I don't think they did. I think Charles was very quick, and he just got thrown when the grip went away, and in in qualifying compared with FP3. Pace in FP3 was enough for him to be on the front row for sure. And when the ambience went up dramatically for qualifying, he lost grip and balance. Now because Lewis has got a sort of wider entry, more fluid style, he was able to accommodate that pretty well. And he's in a rhythm now, and the car's not that bad. And he did an excellent job of that. A really, really good job. And he was confident. And, Lewis Hamilton is a quick racing driver, you got to say. Never forget that. But for Charles, and all he's thinking of is the pole, and on that knife edge, when he started to lose grip and balance, he made mistakes. Top of Massenet, ran wide, in for the second set, hits the barrier, it loses the front, hits the barrier coming out of Tabac. And all of that is just pushing too hard on a car that wasn't then a pole-winning car. So I don't think, what I'm getting around to saying, I'm sure they're all saying, oh, it's got to be the brakes, got to be the brakes. I don't think it was the brakes myself. We're talking, as you correctly say, it's not as if they're going from all Brembo to all carbon industry. It's a mix and match there. And it's not as cut and dried as it was in the carbon industry versus Hitco days at McLaren, for example, between Lewis and Alonso. And I think the one thing Charles would always want is a soft brake pedal, a feel brake pedal, because that's the way he drives. Max would, Antonelli would, as much as you can get it on, within the realms of where we are today. And I think he'll find Lewis's brake set up to have a harder pedal. And yes, he'll have more retardation, and that may be okay, high-speed braking in Barcelona, but I don't think it'll make a massive difference. And he might lose a little bit of feel as a result. So I would think Lewis is feeling pretty good right now about that. A, he's got a setup that Charles is going to take, and that's good for Lewis within the team, isn't it? And B, that may actually, I think it might curb Charles a little bit, and Lewis might be even closer to Charles now as a result. Drew. Hi, Drew. Monaco was a big mess. Alonso say worst generation of car he's ever driven around Monaco. FIA gave everyone penalties for nothing. Max can't leave the line. The road broke. Very unprofessional. With those penalties, I rate Gasly, George would have podium like speeding 1 kilometre over the limit. 5 people and all claim otherwise. That race was rigged. I'm angry. Formula 2 is the new Formula 1. Formula 1 can suck it. Well, I don't see it that way, to be honest with you, Drew. I mean, you're talking about things that have been in Formula 1 forever and ever and ever. Why suddenly in 26 are you getting upset about those sorts of things? They've been there forever. Look at the 76 season. James Hunt wins a Grand Prix, gets disqualified for being half a kilo over the weight limit, and then they reinstate him later on. Things like that. It's happening all the time in Formula 1, in time immemorial. And the road thing, I think the road thing was, they shouldn't have done all that stopping of the race. I agree with you on that point, definitely. I think that's classic overreaction these days. Quite funny that when Stroll goes off, they say, oh, well, it's got to be Stroll. And then when Leclerc goes off, as I did actually, and when Leclerc goes off, it's, oh, the great Charles gone off, must be the track. And so stop the race. Well, what were they going to do? They didn't resurface it or anything. They just cleaned it up a bit. Everybody knew it was there. Every more than that, just as much as when there's debris on the circuit before they cleared it, there's debris going into the tunnel, stay on the right, stay on the left. It's not that big a deal. Just stay on the right side. That's what they should have done. I agree with you about that 100%. As for everything else, the speed limit thing, not the first time we've seen FIA dramas like this. And 0.1 is the same as 25, isn't it? If it's over, it's over. So you can't give the stewards a hard time for that decision. The question is why so many drivers were over the speed limit. And that's, as I've said in the video, and I've said it again with Cameron, I'm saying it again now, definitely there was something wrong. But it was just as wrong as it was when we had the fuel, all the problems, all the fuel filling things from the FIA. If you start having all these rules and regulations, there are always going to be issues, which brings me on to the whole engine, the power unit thing, because Red Bull have been given the position of baseline. In other words, they've got the most powerful engine in Formula 1. Yeah, right. Mercedes are not as good as Red Bull in power, can you believe? And in the new thing, they've been allowed one upgrade now because they've got to try to find a way to get equal power to Red Bull, would you believe? And the others have all got 2 upgrades, including Ferrari, which is quite good news for Ferrari, of course. So what do we make of all that? What I make of that, and you're listening to a cynic now, watching a cynic, is that I think Formula 1 realizes that the more they can help Mercedes power units, the better for Formula 1, because it means, in theory, McLaren, Alpine and Williams are going to be up there or nearer to the front than they would be. And obviously it's going to help the factory team, but is that a problem? No, because we've got this brilliant battle between Kimi and George. That's all the fans want to see anyway. So where's the downside in giving Mercedes a bit of a leg up, especially if they've just been hurt by the compression ratio changes? And they were the guys that originally thought about it. So that's what's going on there. There's at least a third of the grid are going to be tighter in theory because they're going to have more power relative to the opposition. Ferrari, well, they can't complain. They've got 2 upgrades. Yes, they can complain that, oh, well, it's moving goalposts now because Mercedes have also got an upgrade. But from Ferrari's point of view, it's a pretty good result. They may have lost a bit with the compression ratio change, and now they've got 2 upgrades in terms of the amount of money they can spend and time, etc. So that's good. Honda, obviously, as well, and Audi. Try to keep Audi happy. Audi currently not wanting to go away really from where we are, 50-50. most of the teams wanting to go at least to 60-40 next year, which is not enough in my opinion, but nonetheless, even that's going to be quite difficult if they listen to teams like Audi. And Ferrari are kind of going that way as well, because they don't, well, I don't know why really. I think they just think we're doing quite well right now, thank you, with our 2 upgrades probably. So it's a mess. And why is it all a mess? Because we have the cost cap in the first place. As I said at the time, the whole thing about the cost cap is a complete and utter nonsense. And it would be much better for Formula One if we had no restrictions and all of a sudden Mercedes, Ferrari, Audi and whoever, Honda, were all going to start developing their engines to try to do the best job possible to beat one another. And if they want to spend X, let them spend X. If they want to spend Y, and get on with it. And everything has some way of settling down from supply and demand. And this is the reason you've got all this drama, is because on the speed limits, we've got too many rules and regulations. And indeed, when it comes to engine upgrades, it's all ruined by, well, it's all caused by the whole business of cost cutting, which is nonsense. The amounts of money involved is so ridiculously large anyway. They'd be much better off. Not many people would enjoy this, but they'd be much better off saying, right, you've got a choice of 2 engines, Ferrari or Mercedes, and that's it. That's the new Formula One. And you've got to have Ferrari in there because they want to do their own engine. They always will, and they always have. But if it was that, we wouldn't be having these discussions. And it was a bit like that, really, in the old days when we had great Formula One. It was either Cosworth or you drove for Ferrari. I mean, there was Alfa and Matra, but basically it was Cosworth against the others. And that's what we need to have now, really. Standardize it all. Stop faffing around with all these ridiculous recommendations. Everybody trying to be nice to one another, after you, Claude. Trying to be nice to Audi, but at the same time, we want a sport. And look where it is. It's a complete mess now as a result. Yeah, that's my rant for the day. Savage Dougal. There's not a single corner in Barcelona where I can see Russell beating Kimi, especially turn 3, 4, 11 and 12, which are long rotating corners. There's an uphill battle for George and left the car. What about 9 though? What about 9? A massive crosswind. Massive crosswind going in flat out in 7th gear, and suddenly the back end goes like that. You don't think George would be good at that? Let's see. When you say 3, you mean 2 into 3. I don't think you can just take 3 in isolation. It's a bit like 9, 10 in Bahrain. Yes, you can do a great job in 10 if you're unbelievably slow through 9, but the key is to be super quick through 9 and 10. And it's the same with 3. You're not going to be quick into 3. You can be very quick in 3 if you're mega slow out of 2, but you don't want to be slow out of 2. That's the thing. It's a beautiful bit of road. Actually, I think breaking into 1 is not a bad bit of road. There's a bit of a crown on the road there, and it's quite difficult to get it absolutely perfect, bearing in mind the sort of mid-corner rotation you want to get, which you'll see Kimi and Max doing in the middle of 2, just to get the car beautifully rotated for a great exit, so they're not coming out leaning on the rear, and so they can get the car nice and close to the turn-in point for 3. Zavez said, even though Lando wasn't talking, by the way, thanks for all your support for the channel, Zavez, very brilliant. And thanks again to everybody, all the members, the new members we have as well, watching the live stream during the race in Monaco. It was a lot of fun. You know, basically, I think you guys should see it, that let's sort of share this race with Peter, because I'm not going to be perfect. That's absolutely for sure. And I take a lot of stuff from you guys, information, because the problem is I can't watch everything. And sometimes I'm looking at the questions and something dramatic's going on. And I mean, just for example, on the Lewis thing, when he got the penalty, when he served the penalty, I was actually looking at something, I don't know, audio levels or something ridiculous. And I just looked back and just caught the edge of the mechanics sort of going down and putting the guns in, which meant that obviously Lewis had just done his 5-second penalty. And then the next question came up saying, oh, I don't think Lewis served his penalty. And I was able to say, oh, yeah, he did. But it was close, because if I hadn't actually looked back at that millisecond and I was still faffing around with the audio, I would have said, really, he hasn't served his penalty. And, you know, not that you guys get it wrong very often, but that's why I'm asking for you to give me a little bit of leeway, because I'm just juggling all these different things. It's bad enough just doing it like this, let alone with a race going on in the background. And then the other thing, of course, is the audio. I can't, my brain can't handle listening to 2 or 3 people simultaneously. Patrick Head used to do that. having gone from sort of not wanting to have mechanics on the radio at all, he then went to the point where he had Ricardo in one ear, Nigel in the other, Dickie Stanford in his third ear. But the drivers never spoke very much in those days, so it didn't really matter. The other thing that I was going on about with Cameron, which I'm going to say now because I think it's quite an important point, is I think these, the amount of training and scholastic background these engineers have, they're really being underused when they're the guys out there constantly saying you've got Gasly at 3, Lawson at 5. That's what they all do. They get into that sort of thing as soon as the car's on the track. It's okay. Now you've got don't watch out for piano, and it's all, I don't know. I just think, why are the race engineers doing that? They've got, no wonder some of them get a bit flustered sometimes. No wonder, when George came in, they forgot to give him the penalty because there's so much going on. That was a classic, absolute keystone cop, wasn't it? And yet McLaren, I think, according to Mark, McLaren used to get it absolutely right. The race engineers did the race engineering job, and the strategy people did all the GPS stuff on the lap. Now, I suppose, again, it may be budget cap and the number of people they have, I don't know, on the pit wall and everything, but I suppose also it's kind of difficult to interface between the engineer and if you had a strategy guy doing the calls purely on the gaps. Because when the engineer, but then again, the engineer should be able to just overrule that straight away and just say, look, in, whatever. Don't forget the penalty, and just be on top of everything. I think it's because there's too much. The engineer is doing too much of that GPS stuff, actually, and I think we saw it at Mercedes with George. Zabez again. All the penalty mess in the pit lane is because the FIA measure distance time to make sure the cars are not over the speed limit, and the drivers went a little bit tighter, cutting the line. Hence, the mess. Why don't they just measure the speed of the drivers? It's not like they don't have that data or the technology is limiting them. Way to ruin a great drive by Gasly. Yeah, great drive by Gasly, blowing away Lando for a lot of the race, hanging in there with the McLarens. And I've said from day one, what a great driver Pierre Gasly is. And actually, I don't think, I did say, they had a lot of issues with the car in Miami in Canada, and they kind of got it right for Monaco. As I understand it, there wasn't actually enough time to do the absolute forensic check that they wanted to before Monaco. And I doubt they will have in Spain, but nonetheless, a little bit more time has passed to look at various bits and bobs, I guess, and analyze things on the car. So in Spain, he should go pretty well too, I think. I'm not sure about whether, going into the detail of how they actually do the looping on the speed. Yeah, what can I say about that? I think it's just an agonizing road to nowhere if you start to analyze that, any more than it was worth analyzing why one team had a fuel filler that was faster than another. It's just, the FIA have loops. The teams know where the loops are. They calibrate the speed of the car over those loops during Friday and Saturday. And come race day, they should be on top of that. Even if there is a situation where they can turn in more sharply, they can do this, they can do that. There's no excuse, really. I mean, it's there and you work around it. And Monaco is always difficult anyway. So just got a couple of super chats here. Thank you very much. This is from D-Herb. Amazing the confidence Lewis gives to young drivers. Yeah, I think, and Debbie follows it up. Debbie Maffo, Lewis brings so much knowledge to Ferrari. Listen. Yeah, he's very good like that. And, the young driver, I guess, is Charles Leclerc, and good on that. And Lewis, to his credit, he's always been a carbon industry guy, and that's what McLaren had when he joined McLaren, and he stayed with them. And it was Fernando that went away to Hitco. And since the regulations have tightened up in terms of the disc being mandatory in size and weight and so forth, material, then it's more of a mix and match. Do you use carbon industry calipers, Brembo pads, all these things? And Lewis has done a good job there. He's got a great left foot, that's for sure. We've got a lot of Lewis fans here, I think. It's the same team, but let's do the count in 26 that Lewis beats Max Verstappen. Yeah, he could do. What is it all about? Max Red Bull, Debbie Maffa. Yeah. Well, what is it all about? Max Red Bull. Well, I think Max will be very, very amused to think that he's had the best engine all year so far. As the Mercs blast past him in China, wherever it was. I'm not sure if you've addressed this, but any thoughts on Ferrari's brake partner Brembo, given Hamilton ditched them and Charles crashed with them? Yeah, I mean, did Charles crash with them? I know he said, "Oh, I couldn't do any more. The brakes didn't work." I mean, if he was, I couldn't quite get what he said. I had the pedal very, very light, foot very light on the brake pedal, and the car still wouldn't stop. Very strange. I've sort of said already what I think about that, and I think it's very easy to just jump on things. I think Charles is jumping on a few things, and he's missing a few dots there. And I think Brembo do a very, very good job and provide very, very good brakes. And I think you'll find they're doing a very good job with a lot of teams right now. So Lewis has always been more carbon industry inclined, and that means he's always, because from day one in Formula One in 07, he liked the carbon. He grew up with the carbon industry, quite heavy pedal brake, and very good stopping power, and he never had an issue with that. It's quite a blunt feel. Whereas Alonso did. As soon as Alonso got in the McLaren, oh, what's this? And he'd only driven on Hitcos, so they put the Hitcos on which he had at Renault. So now Charles, I think, has always driven with Brembo. I would imagine, whether it be Alfa Romeo and now Ferrari, always with Brembo, which is, as I say, quite a soft pedal. And I can't see how going to a harder pedal is going to be an improvement for him. He may be okay around some circuits, but at high speed stops, it won't be a bad thing to have carbon industry because that's what they do really well. But really sensitive stuff that Charles does very well in terms of slow corners, getting into the corner early, Rascasse type stuff, turn 1, 2, Canada, nothing in Austria. But then, I don't know, a few of the slow corners at Silverstone, for example, not the quick ones, but the slow ones. I'm not sure he's going to have the same pedal feel with the carbon industries that he has with Brembo. And I'm not sure that he had a major brake problem anyway. And as I say, this may sound unbelievably pompous, but I just think the Ferrari did not have a lot of grip at Monaco. And the way Charles drives that Ferrari, he can't really do what he does unless he's got a really good front end. And he didn't have that in qualifying all the race. And it's a very short step from there to say, oh, the brakes are terrible. Well, they would be because you haven't got much grip. Brakes do rely on the tires for grip. Anyway, that's just me, and I may well be wrong, but all I've ever done all my life is express my opinion, and that's what I think. I've always been a carbon industry guy too, in terms of I like the company, I like the way they are. And Brembo, to me, have always had quite a lot of hype around them. They've all done more with social media and advertising. We all know the Brembo name, but I do have a lot of respect for the Brembo brakes and how soft they are, and that's what is that's the hallmark of Brembo, and that softness is something that I would bet Max is on Brembos. I would be pretty sure he was. Anyway, Trailbreaker 3. Social media trolls, even journalists, have never driven an F1 car. Talk is cheap. George Russell is a 3-time champion in the junior series. What's this all about? What are we saying? George is just as good as Kimi right now? Not quite sure what you mean by that, Trailbreak. I have driven Formula One cars. Doesn't make me any more valid a critic of anybody. And I hope I'm not a critic. I just try to analyze styles. And for me, George he's immensely fast, but I don't think he's ever worked. I don't think he's ever improved in terms of his spikiness and turn in and his ability to be supple and soft with the car, compared with a driver like Kimi, compared with a driver like his teammates, even Lewis. Once Lewis was shocked down to where he was in 2022, 23, he was okay, but he's never driven with a guy like Kimi alongside the other car. It would be the same as if he was driving alongside Lewis in 2021. That would have shown up George a lot more. So, that's all I can say to that. Journalists, social media trolls, no, I don't imagine many of them have driven Formula One cars. And 3 times champion in the junior series. Yeah, yeah. Not sure. I mean, I think that's very valid, and you can't take that away from him any more than you can other drivers. And speaking of that, Leonardo Fornaroli is going to be in Lando's car, FP1 in Barcelona. And normally I don't mention things like that because I don't really think these guys are given much of an opportunity to do much with the car in terms of go out on a new set of tyres and really go quickly. But I'm going to be fascinated to see how he goes because he, of course, did win Formula 3 and Formula 2 in successive years. And I managed to do that without having any affiliation with the Formula 1 team, which I think, as I said at the time, I think is one of the reasons he did do it, because he didn't have all these Formula 1 people telling him what to do or not what to do. And he just got on and did his own thing. Now he's a McLaren driver. It's slightly different because he's not racing in those categories. And he's done quite a lot of testing in old cars and plus simulator, obviously. I think he'll go really well. I've got a lot of time for Fornaroli. I think he's going to be really, really good. But we'll see on Friday. And Lewis, yeah, and George, there's no doubt. I mean, George, whatever he was doing in Formula 3 and Formula 2, he was always the best, if not, running with the best. He was absolutely brilliant in both of them. And he took that into Formula 1. And, how many journalists took the trouble to go and interview him in Abu Dhabi when he was racing GP3 and Formula 1 and testing Formula 1 the same weekend? But I remember chatting to him. He breathlessly got back to the GP3 paddock, and I did a chat with him there. And he's a great guy. I just wish he'd done a few days with Rob 2 years ago and kept it going. Right, we got that one, I think. Grand Inquisiteur. Hi Peter, what do you make of Isaac Hadjar's development so far? I think he could even snatch a win this year. And along with Kimi, he seems like one of the best additions to the grid. Absolutely. Yeah. Said that last year. I mean, we had all this stuff from Nico Rosberg, didn't we? Saying, that's the end of, I think I may be misquoting him because I can't imagine he said anything so daft, but it seemed the quotes that I heard were, it's the end of Hadjar. If he goes into that number 2 Red Bull, that's the end of his career sort of thing, which is a pretty cliche-strewn opinion. And for me, it was always going to be a brilliant thing because he's got the basic Max, Charles, Antonelli talent very clearly. And if he uses his brain well and looks at the way Max goes about his racing and runs the garage and his side of the garage and runs the team, his side of the part of the team, and just generally runs the car over a race weekend, imagine how Isaac Hadjar is going to improve. And I think we're starting to see that now. He's really, really good. And I'm not surprised at all, because could he be in a better situation than alongside Max Verstappen, learning like this with that sort of talent? And that's the difference. He's got that talent, whereas sadly the other teammates they've had there recently haven't. And it's a perfect combination. And that's exactly what Red Bull have always wanted to have, is a guy that's on the way to being another Max, but isn't going to give Max a hard time in terms of his peripheral vision and the way he wants to run the car and the team. And obviously the team is still very much molded around Max, and why wouldn't it be? But you've got a guy in the other car who can deliver now. I mean, Yuki wouldn't have got that result at Monaco, nor would Liam Lawson, nor would, Perez might have, I guess, but I don't think so. It's not as good a car as it was when he was driving it, the Red Bull, that is. Is it fair to say we won't be seeing George in his hairband again this season? That's the first I've known that he wore a hairband. I don't know what that's all about, but if it was for effect, I suspect he's probably going to discard all that stuff. But if it was something else, I don't know. Brian Murphy, Peter, you're a legend in Formula 1. Formula E is its own. All true fans want V10 back. Thank you for all you do for the sport. Thank you. Well, yeah, we'd love to have V10s, V8s, normally aspirated. Wouldn't that be wonderful? If they announce tomorrow, we're fed up with all this. 2028, back to normally aspirated, V10s for everybody, get on with it. And if you don't like it, get out of the sport. That'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? But no, it won't happen. Too many Wall Streeters having their salmon and cream cheese bagels, wanting to see more car companies in Formula 1 so the stock price can go even higher. Mike Tyson. Hi, Peter. Do you think people underappreciated what Schumacher did at Mercedes? And I think Max is of the same breed. It's an interesting point. It's a shame Mark's in Barcelona, actually, as I speak. And I think he would say yes, because he thinks Michael did a pretty good job that time. He engineered Michael. And a couple of conversations we've had about that, it's how good Michael was. And, he told that story, the anecdote from Monaco, when he put the ride height a bit too low at the front and Michael went off and was immediately, understanding and didn't give him a hard time. And then the following year, basically put the car on the pole and then got that penalty, didn't he? Another penalty. So I think it was, for me, it was an unnecessary return to Formula One. I wish he hadn't done it, because it was already the times were changing. Nico Rosberg was quick and getting better all the time. And there's a limit to how much a guy like Michael can bring to any team and feed off that. And there wasn't a lot. The way he worked was still brilliant, but I don't know. It was classic Michael, though. It was the sort of dichotomy of Michael, wasn't it? Because on the one hand, there's the sort of unbelievably professional, detail man, Formula One man. On the other hand, was the T-boner of Jacques Villeneuve at Jerez. There was the skydiver, the motorbike racer, all these things that were sort of in bleak contrast to the aforementioned professor. And that was the great thing. And coming back to Mercedes, Norbert Haug, I think, was a big part of that as well, was characteristic of Michael. Speaking of Norbert, who was instrumental, really, I think, in bringing Michael to Mercedes out of retirement, he was also instrumental, really, in a lot of what we have today with Mercedes powertrain. And I think it's kind of sad how Norbert is not remembered for that. He's still around doing stuff, and he was it was his own man, that's for sure. But Norbert Haug moved mountains in terms of where Mercedes are today with their own power unit and with the way the team is. He's not given much credit. He was just suddenly dismissed from the whole thing, and Toto arrived, and that was it. Trail break 3. The great Alan Prost stated that Kimi isn't better than George and is being propped up by Toto. Yeah, well, I mean, that's a classic Prost, isn't it? I mean, that's the Prost that drove Nigel to distraction at Ferrari in 1990, when Nigel was just enjoying a really nice version of the John Barnard car, as developed beautifully by Enrique Scalabroni, who just happened to be an ex-Williams engineer. And Prost, because Nigel was going so well, finding a reason for it. And the reason was, he's got a Williams engineer there that's helping him. So I'm going to get Steve Nichols from McLaren to help me. And it was a complete mess as a result. And when Prost did his own Formula One team, it was a mess. This is the great professor who should, had all the money that he needed to have. He had everything going for him, and yet it was a mess from beginning to end. And I don't respect, if Prost did say that, and he's not being misquoted, then sadly that's, not a great thing to have said, because it's not true. Of course, Kimi's unbelievably close to Toto. Why wouldn't he be? I mean, Toto plucked him out of nowhere and has given him this opportunity, just like Ron with Lewis. And I can't imagine a greater feeling. Well, I've kind of felt it, because in my own way, I was very close to Nigel for so many years, out of Formula 3 into a sort of wasteland of nobody wanting to have him as a driver and nobody rating him, particularly the British press. And then eventually, pushing here, shoving there, using Peter Collins, other friends, David Phipps, all helping to get Nigel into a position where he could actually show his talent, and eventually did. And eventually he won the World Championship, and I was team manager at the time. So I can kind of understand how Toto felt that day, or even felt at Monaco. And if Kimi goes on to win the championship this year. But, George has got everything there that he needs to go and beat Kimi. He's got a very good race car. He's got half the Mercedes garage. He's got half the factory, probably more. And he's got all that experience in road dust. No excuse whatsoever. And how is Kimi being propped up by Toto? What does that mean? Oh, don't tell George, Kimi, but we're going to give you 3 different upgrades on the car that he's not going to have. I mean, it's just complete nonsense. Would that ever happen? Or, we found a way around the regulations to give you 30 horsepower more and George won't know about it. Yeah, right. I mean, I think a lot of these people just live in a fantasy land, don't they? Max Flash Art. Sorry, I'm not wearing the t-shirt today, Max. I did wear it the other day, though. I wasn't filming, though. I was golfing, I think. We brought great holes back again. Anyway, Thank you, Max. For your information, Ayuma Iwasa will drive Isaac Hajjar's car on the F1, FP1 Barcelona. Yeah, yeah. No, there'll be a lot of young drivers coming in now to do these things in FP1. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Quite a lot of discussion about where, and yeah, and Luke Browning as well. Quite a lot of discussion, but the one that's interesting for me is Leonardo, because we haven't yet seen him, have we? All the others we kind of know about, but this one is different, and I think it could be quite special. I just hope they throw some tires at him and let him go out and do a time. Have some fun anyway. That's be the right way to phrase it. I was talking about, oh yeah, Nirai Fukuzumi. I still want to see him in the Haas. I want to see him in a Haas testing role and getting a lot of drives with Haas next year through Toyota. I know there are a lot of other Japanese drivers in the running there. Yuki Tsunoda being one probably, but I think he's sort of gravitated from, or could gravitate from Honda to that, not being with Honda anymore. So yeah, I'd like to see Fukuzumi be given a chance. He just won that amazing race at Suzuka as well, as predicted. Not as predicted, but as I suspected in the back of my mind, he would be very good. And he's got Marizo behind him. Trailbreak says Lewis now uses Carbon Industries brake rotors, which means our word is discs, which suit his late braking style. Yeah, well, I mean, he doesn't actually brake that late, Lewis. So I'm not quite sure what that means. He likes a very, very nice pedal under high-speed braking, but he's not a late braker, not in the way Liam Lawson is, or Carlos Sainz is, or even good example, I would say, who's the latest breaker in Formula One right now? Good question. I would say probably Carlos would be near it, actually. If I think of Albon, maybe. They're both late breakers at Williams, for sure. But no, Lewis is not a late breaker. He likes that solid feel, but more importantly, he's never really driven anything else. And that's why he was kind of a bit thrown when he got the softer Brembo pedal, I think, when he first got to Ferrari. But it's not because of his late braking style. Let's not confuse things. Invincible Isaac 2000. Hi, Peter. Do you think George can claw back his 68-point gap over the remainder of the season? I haven't done enough homework here to see what the gap was what was the biggest gap between Piastri and Norris last year? Probably wasn't 68, but at one point Piastri had a fairly healthy lead, didn't he? So, I mean, if you look at it from the perspective of if Kimi continues to win a reasonable number of races between now and the end of the year, and when he's not winning, finish second or third, it's going to be very difficult for George to overcome that, assuming reliability at Mercedes, which we can't assume, can we, after what happened to George in Canada. So I do think he can, yeah. 68 is, it's 2 wins and a bit with Kimi not scoring there, and that could easily happen. There's a lot of races where things can go wrong, just as there are a lot of races where you can accumulate points and make it incredibly difficult for your teammate. So I don't know. I mean, we love to chat about the points and the championship and where it's going. I can't imagine Kimi's even looking at the points total or even thinking about it. All he's thinking about is FP1 Barcelona, what he's going to do with the car, what the circuit's going to feel like in the car, what the corners are going to feel like, what it did feel like in the shakedown compared with now, how he has to be ready for that, go and do a bit of sim work, do this, do that, and just one day at a time. Don't even look at the points any more than a golfer looks at who's leading with 3 holes to go, even if he's playing well. Just focus on the next hole. Thank you. Barish Kadeshi. Hi, Peter. If Max joins Mercedes next year, do you think they could dominate Antonelli? Well, it's a big if there. And as I said to Cameron, I think if you're Toto, you wouldn't want to unsettle a very, very well-balanced team now. Kimi with George in the other car. George obviously still very capable of winning races, but Kimi super special, the sort of next Max, if you like. From Max's point of view, he'd love to have a better race car, and he wouldn't really mind having Antonelli in the other car. He would see it probably at this stage of his career, first time he'd have somebody that quick in the other car, in a good car. He'd probably see it as a bit of a challenge and something that would keep him refreshed and something he'd want to do. And from Kimi's point of view, I think he'd love it as well. You know, he's got all his career ahead of him. Get Max in there, beat Kimi, beat Max periodically. He's looking good. So it might happen, it might not. If I was Toto, I wouldn't do it because I think he's got such a good combination already, and it could end up with 2 cars eliminated in the first corner on too many occasions. So that's why I wouldn't do it. Would he dominate Antonelli? No way. He wouldn't dominate him. No, he might. It'd be if assuming they, you know, don't take one another out all the time and they finish races, I think it'll be very, very close between those two all the way to the championship. You're looking at, you know, the last race probably defining it, but it may not be that, as I say, because there'll be too many shunts. There'll be too many Max and Kimi shunts for sure if they put them together in a car that good, definitely. And I think it's, you know, I've made this point before. It's one thing to have, say, Kimi and Max together when the car isn't a championship winning car, because they'll always get on well. But if it is a championship winning car and every race they know one or the other is going to win, that's a different deal altogether in terms of how to handle your drivers. This one is, yes, from Chandra again. No question. Just wanted to say your watch along and commentary were great. Very insightful and emotional. No defending things, calling them out. Oh, thank you very much. Very kind. It's very good. It's very sweet of you to say that. Thank you. Max flash out again. Then Charles blamed his brakes, not the track. I think it was the track and told to avoid it. Well, yeah. You know, I think it was the track. He could avoid it. And of course, the brakes are going to be rubbish if the tyres are rubbish. Well, sorry, if the grip's rubbish and the tyres are cold, which they were. You see how much Kimi was complaining about how slow the safety car was. Can't it go any quicker? Why is it so slow? He said that about 3 times. And that's very, you know, unusual for Kimi to do that because he's not a prima donna at all, is he? And he was just moaning, not complaining about it to Bono. And the answer was, well, you know, he's trying to get the cars at the back to join the front and doing all that at Monaco. They need to look at that, in fact, because it's such a twisty, short, funny lap that if you've got to do that, you know, the temperatures are going to drop through the floor. If you've got to wait for all these back markers to come through the swimming pool Rascasse and you're already at Saint-Devote, you know, that's why it took so long. And you could argue, well, you know, that's part of racing, isn't it? Yeah, but we either want tyres running at temperature or we don't. And that's why there's been so much discussion about the warmers, how much energy the warmers should be allowed to have. And every time they try and cut back, it gets changed and we go to hotter tyres again because it's such an important thing. And I think Charles is in danger, as I've said a couple of times already in this live stream, of judging the Brembo brakes based on a lack of grip, which was clear with the Ferrari at various points on Saturday afternoon and most of Sunday. Mouse down. Should Max drop the number 3 and go back to 33? His bad luck ever since switching to 3 has been absolutely remarkable. Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it? It'd be good from a marketing point of view. Then everybody have to go out and buy the 33 again. So he'd make more money, that's for sure. If he did that. Luck. Does Max believe in luck? I'm not sure he does. I think he probably just accepts everything ultimately, realizes the reason for things happening and goes along with it. But from a marketing point of view, would make some sense. He could get away with it. I wonder if anybody else is allowed to come in and nick 33. That would annoy him, wouldn't it? Deb Malaya Gahosh. Should Max switch from F1 to GT3? Clearly F1 isn't working for him. Well, I wouldn't say that. He's just got front row of the grid, nearly got the pole for the Monaco Grand Prix. So what do you mean? In a year when he obviously doesn't have a race winning car or championship winning car anyway. So I think it is working for him. It's allowing him to display his talent like I mean, that was one of the best qualifying sessions and one of the best exhibitions of high speed precision driving I've seen for a long, long time. So I think, you know, do as many GT3 races as he can, given the limitations of the Formula One calendar. Do it. Great to see. Keep racing and if he can, win races, because you always want to keep that feeling of winning if you're not winning in your prime category. So it's a good thing to do, and I hope he does. It's a brilliant thing, that GT3. Speaking of which, it's Le Mans, I think, isn't it, this weekend? Something like that. So, yeah. Max flash up. Red Bull has the most explosive PU. Yeah, Le Mans this weekend. David Brown just confirmed that. Best wishes to My mate Jack Aitken, actually, I hope he goes well. He's been going quite well recently, so he's very good. Uh, and he used to be George's teammate, of course, and used to run pretty near George periodically. Had the odd moment, but George always used to do him on tire management at ART, virtually all the time. Tinney one. Hi, Mr. Windsor. Do you think at this rate Toto will drop Russell, and who might he replace him with? Well, I think a lot of the internet people think, oh yeah, George Russell, he's slow now, got to get rid of him. A, he's not slow. B, he's still quite capable of winning Grand Prix. And C, he's a perfect teammate for Kimi Antonelli now. So why would you want to get rid of him? I don't understand this obsession with wanting to have two absolutely perfect drivers in both cars running into one another and taking points from one another. I mean, we had two drivers pretty closely matched. I wouldn't say they were perfect and at the top of their skill level, of the skill level that is attainable in Formula One. But in Lando and Oscar, we had two guys of about the same level, different styles, more or less, but about the same level of performance. And look at the trouble they had winning a championship between those two. You know, you don't need to make it that difficult. Just have a nicely balanced team where one driver is clearly the mega guy and who's got it, and the other guy on his day, if things go right, can also win and do well. Sergio Perez played that role pretty well at Red Bull for a while. Valtteri Bottas played that role pretty well at Mercedes. Rubens Barrichello, Felipe Massa alongside Michael. So George Russell is a perfect guy for Mercedes now if you've got Kimi. So why would you want to put Max in there? It just doesn't make sense to me. Why would he drop Russell? Because he's not quick enough. I mean, he's absolutely still very capable of winning Grand Prix and obviously the World Championship this year. And just because if he doesn't, it doesn't mean to say you drop him, because guess what? Kimi's won in the other car and the team's done a very good job. Hasty. I don't get why Formula One don't give a secret helping hand to Red Bull and Ferrari. Ferrari versus Max versus Kimi, swapping positions every lap would be peak entertainment. Well, I think they have a little bit, haven't they? Not, let's take Max out of it now, but they've certainly given a bit of a hand to Ferrari. They've got 2 engine upgrades now, and that's more than Mercedes have got. So Ferrari have come out of this new thing quite well. So there's that. And then Formula One, as I said before, I think Formula One see Mercedes as a sort of Cosworth supplier of the old days. You know, they're doing a lot of teams, and the more teams that are up there, the Alpines, the Williams, the McLarens, the better. I mean, I'm sure Liberty would love to see Lando and Oscar up there winning Grand Prix alongside Mercedes, if that's what happens with this engine upgrade thing. The problem is Max, and how to keep him in it and have him eyeball to eyeball with Kimi. And until they have a better car, you could almost argue it's kind of a moot point as to what the power unit limitations are, because quite clearly that Red Bull, in my opinion, is still not as good a car as a Ferrari or probably even a McLaren. I think Max is overdriving it, he's over delivering in terms of how it looks, but I don't think it's anything in the same class as a Mercedes. That's not to say that, you know, that to dilute the quality of Kimi's lap. I think Kimi got just about the maximum from that car. And as I said in my video, I don't think after the race, after qualifying, I don't think Max would have got a lot more out of that Mercedes had he been in that car. What I'm saying is, at Monaco, specifically at Monaco, where the cars were energy rich and Max could use the brakes for the first time this year, as Max likes to use the brakes into a corner, he was able to take the Red Bull right up onto the front row. Wow. But I don't think he'll be able to do that in Barcelona and Austria and places like that, because the car's just not good enough. Not the power, the car. So Max Flasher, Peter, add that to your t-shirt collection. Yeah, I will. Still kind of waiting to see what we're trying to do. A merchandising deal at the moment, doesn't seem to be happening, so I might well do that. Dan says, why do I hate Liam Lawson so much? I don't hate him at all. I actually spent a lot of time with Liam when he was in, well, a lot of time. I watched him a lot, interviewed him quite a lot when he's in Formula 3, really rate him as a massively talented car control driver. So, you know, I'm a little bit confused as to why you think I hate him. All I've ever done is describe Liam as the driver he is. Very, very wide, long corners, late breaker, and great car control, but long corners and quite not that spiky, very, very smooth, I think, in his inputs. But because he's such a load the rear up, late turn in driver, you know, that's great. That's Ronnie Peterson, but it's not Max Verstappen. It's not Kimi Antonelli. So please don't confuse my descriptions of, I often use Liam as a good example of a very, very long corner driver, in the same way I use Carlos Sainz. That isn't a criticism, it's a description of the way they drive. It's just the way they do it. It's like some tennis players have a big serve, others don't. Some are serve and volleyers, others are not. It's just that we do have some guys who, in my opinion, do it in a way that is unbeatable. And that is the way Max, Charles and Kimi is now driving. So that's it. I don't hate him at all. Why would I hate him? He's a good bloke. And he did a lot for charity over the winter. And he's fun to watch, particularly semi-wet conditions. He's a lot of fun to watch. He did a great job at Monaco, kept it on the straight and narrow too. Like I use that phraseology because the way he drives, he is more prone to making mistakes. And he's getting better. He's not making as many mistakes as he used to. But when your style of driving is based on braking in a straight line as late as possible, and then getting on the power as soon as possible. Yes, he's got all the talent to do that really well, but to do that lap after lap after lap on the absolute limit, when every corner is changing in terms of grip, when wind direction's changing, when the weight of the car is changing, when the deg of the tire is going down, and being able to work around that on an envelope that works without starting to brake earlier or get on the power a little bit later. Very difficult to do that without locking an inside front or the rear going away from you or having a bit of oversteer when you don't want it. Whereas the Kimi style, the Max style, they're constantly managing the weight as it's happening into the corner with very, very soft movements. Completely different style to Liam Lawson. And the Liam Lawson, Carlos Sainz style of driving, for me, in terms of finding the ultimate lap time from the car, can work on a new set of tires in qualifying on a perfect lap. They can do that somewhere near it. But in the race, they're always going to have to come back from the limits just to find a sweet spot in which to operate. And yeah, that requires mental discipline. And as I say, Liam and Carlos found that a couple of years ago, and Liam's finding that now. That's good. But he'll never drive like Kimi Antonelli. It's nothing to do with hatred. So please, I try not to hate anybody in the world, actually. I don't. Lisa Boeva, why would Wolf drop off Russell? If he can finish at least P2 in the championship, he's safe. Well, I hope you're not asking me that question because I've just said he shouldn't and wouldn't. And well, I don't think he will, but he might. Trailbreaker, Monaco Grand Prix. I've never seen so many penalties, like Le Mans endurance racing. Yeah, well, that's when you have all these penalties. It's all to do with overcomplication, too many rules, and things will inevitably go wrong. The starting procedure in Canada, So all these things are not bulletproof. And the more you complicate motor racing by having cost caps, by having speed limits, by having penalties for sporting infringements, all these things, a rule book this thick, the more issues there are going to be. And that's the way the Formula One people want it, because it's so competitive. And if you don't do that, then what do you do? I suppose is what you do. We don't have a Bernie anymore who just says, get on with it. Turn a blind eye, Charlie. Forget all that speed limit and rubbish in this race. It's nonsense. It's probably what Bernie would have said. But, we're not in that world anymore. That was one of the great things about Bernie. Bernie was a complete racer, won the world championship three times, with his own team. And if he could sniff halfway through the race that there was something going wrong with the speed limit thing, and there were too many drivers suddenly 0.1 over the limit, he would have said to Charlie, forget all that stuff. Don't let the stewards see all that's nonsense. Something's wrong. But they don't have that lateral ability to do that anymore. That's one area where we do miss Bernie, I think. If Honda, this is another Super chat, thank you very much. If Honda let Newey design down, I feel that Aston Martin had Merc engine. I feel it would have been very close to Mercedes. Yeah, we all feel that, but sadly, it wasn't the case. And Adrian knew what he was getting into when he went there. No excuse really, because he already had a lot of experience working with Honda, and he knew firsthand how Honda work, and he presumably should have known how they could potentially drop the ball in a couple of areas. And one of his first ports of call should have been staying in Japan with a proper team that he put together to make sure it was all going in the right direction. Because Adrian's not stupid when it comes to power units either. We talk about him as an aerodynamicist or a suspension designer or whatever you want to do, but he's also very, very good on power units. And Adrian would have been able to sniff very early on, had he paid attention, some of the issues that are in the Honda engine now, and he didn't. And I'll never know why until I ask him at some point when it's not too difficult. Trail break. Toto warned the drivers to bring the car home in one piece. After Canada, he split the drivers up. Toto's always done that. No, I don't think he did. He didn't split them up. He just said, I don't want to see you guys hitting one another. And this, of course, is nonsense because they always will if they're that close. And George is more and more desperate to win races and show his speed and his superiority. That's where this whole business of having two very quick drivers on the days when George is right there is not what you want if you've got a championship winning team. As I've said a million times, that's where you want a Sergio Perez or an Isaac Hadjar in the other car, because they're going to keep, they're going to show their respectful distance, I imagine. I mean, maybe not Isaac. Imagine if Isaac and Max are alongside one another, row 2 in Barcelona, and Isaac's on the inside and Max makes a bit of a slower start and Isaac's got the inside there. Max goes around the outside for 1. What happens at 2? You don't want that. And you don't want that, especially if you've got a championship chance. And that whole business, the whole Christian Horner pathetic thing of race one another hard, but don't run into one another. What the hell's that mean? It doesn't mean anything. You just don't create those situations in the first place. That's the only way you can avoid it. Or you do the Michael Schumacher thing, the Alan Jones thing as well, and you actually get a contract signed with the other driver which says that he is undisputably the number 2 and that he will always give position to the number 1 driver whenever he's told to do so. And I don't remember the last time any driver signed a contract like that in Formula One. Rubens Barrichello was probably the last. And, that's what it would take. Until then, Toto can say all he likes. But when the adrenaline's flowing a little bit and Kimi's got a bit of a chance and he's down the inside because that's the bit of road he normally uses, and George is a little bit wider because that's the bit of road he always uses, what's Kimi going to do? He's going to go for it, isn't he? As we saw in Canada. And I don't even know if Mercedes stroke the engineers appreciate how much earlier Kimi does turn in to a lot of corners these days. And they are going to get in that position. They're going to be, if you take a corner like, what's a good example of one? Well, maybe even turn 11 or 12 in Barcelona. Kimi might be behind George there, lap 3, heavy load of fuel, and George is sort of middle of the road waiting to come in for a later apex, and Kimi's already sort of turned in early for his early apex. And he think, what's George doing out there? Oh, he's letting me pass. Oh, I'll go down the inside. Oh, no, he's not. Bang. That's what could happen because they don't understand, really, I think, how differently they drive. You can see it now. We're talking one another. George is about half a second behind Kimi, which is a lot, isn't it? It is. Do you think, says Arthur, do you think Toto prefers Kimi as a world champion, both from a business and personal point of view? No. A personal point of view, I think from a personal point of view, he'd love it, that having plucked him out of Formula 4 into Formula 1 and he's world champion. I think the other side of Toto is how close he is to George and how much time he spent with George and how he's created George's career as well. Well, really, in terms of taking him from Williams and supporting George when he was at Williams anyway, and then giving him the opportunities at Mercedes and getting rid of Valtteri for George and all these things he's done for George. I think he'd feel very bad for George And Toto is a racer, he's a human being, and I think it would be a very bittersweet moment for him because, on the one hand, he does have a soft spot for George, for sure. And I think it'd be difficult for him. From a business point of view, I suppose there's a bit more of a storyline to a 19-year-old, I guess he'd be 20 by then, will he? 20-year-old Italian with curly hair and a glint in his eye being world champion in a Mercedes from nowhere, compared with George, who's a sort of, been there, done that, classic, perfect Formula One driver in many ways. So, yeah, from a business point of view, it probably has more luster if Kimi wins. But I think if George won it in the end, I think Toto would be very, very happy because of his history with George as well and all he's done with George. Zishan Afsar, Peter, what did you make of Russell saying after the race that the Merc has gone away from his driving style and more towards Kimi's? Excuses for Kimi wiping the floor? Yeah, definitely. I think what he should have been saying is Kimi's driving style has gone further and further away from mine, George's, and he's better in virtually every area now. And I need to do a lot of work in order to catch up, but I can do it. I know I will, and I'm going to be beating him by the season's end. That's what he should have been saying, instead of blaming the car. Nonsense. Very good race car. If you can't, I mean, it doesn't even bear thinking about. How can you say, as I said before, if anything, these cars actually have hurt Kimi a little bit because on most circuits, he can't do under braking what he could do at Monaco under braking, like Max. And that would help George, because George is very bright and he's very good at using all the strats. So if anything, it's helped him. There's nothing else there that would have hurt him at all. The classic Brembo brake disc received a scathing review. Did it? I didn't see that. Where did he post that review? Did he do a compare and contrast? The Brembo with the exactly the same conditions, exactly the same tires, exactly the same time of day. He did a back-to-back, and then he published all the results. Lewis Hamilton? Not sure. Max Flashart, Red Bull Racing uses Brembo, but sources its carbon friction components from Carbon Industries. Well, yeah, no surprise there. I think, as I say, if you want to understand it, Brembo basically, and if you've got calipers, for sure it will be a softer feel than the Carbon Industry. But if you then mix that with Carbon Industry materials, maybe you're going to get a bit more retardation. But be careful that it doesn't change from race to race as well. There's a lot of secrecy still in the braking departments of most of the Formula One teams, and you see a lot of the braking engineers hovering around garages, and you think, oh wow, what's that Carbon Industry bloke doing at Red Bull? And he's probably got some component on there. I don't think many teams run pure Brembo or pure Carbon Industry, so there's nothing magical about mix and matching these days. Zashin Afsar, Peter, is there any way Monaco could be reconfigured for better racing? By which you mean more overtaking, I suppose? Not really. It's a bit like Bernie when Ayrton Senna said, I'm not happy about Tamburello, Bernie. We need to make more runoff area there or put a chicane in. Bernie said, well, chicane maybe, costs a bit of money. Who's going to pay for it? And the runoff area, what are you going to do? Fill in the river? What are you going to do? Reclaim some land at Monaco and build a massively long straight with DRSs? I wish they wouldn't. I love Monaco as it is. What's the problem? We all know it's to do with qualifying, but we still had a lot of scrummage, didn't we? A few bunker shots in Monaco, and not everybody got out with one clean shot. And that's it. That's what you expect from Monaco. And that qualifying session for me was better than all the racing we've had this year. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I can't think of any moment in Formula One so far that has been better than Q1, Q2, Q3 at Monte Carlo this year. Great. And that's all Monaco gave us this year. So be it. Brilliant. Bring it on for next year. D. Herb, Russell, from the heir apparent to number 2, Mercedes. shown up by a teenager. Going to be mission impossible to win the World Drivers' Championship. Poor old George. Come on now. He's not that bad. He's not that slow. He will get it back together again. There'll be lots of circuits where he will be very, very near Kimi, if not slightly ahead of him. Austria. I'll be shocked if George doesn't win the Austrian Grand Prix. Absolutely shocked. Because it's just it's just a stupid circuit, and it's a great circuit for racing for TV, but it's not a technical circuit for the drivers at all. And they'll be good there, Mercedes, for sure. So he's got a very good chance of winning Austria, and he could win Spanish Grand Prix. I think they could well be. Peter, what do you think of Pierre Wache and Red Bull? Yeah, I wish you hadn't asked me that question because I don't really know. I've been trying to make my mind up. How can I make my mind up? I don't know enough about him, the team there now, any more than we really knew what the team behind Adrian Newey was. We don't get those details. And so you can only look at the evidence and the results. And I don't know. I think I tell you what, I've got a lot of time for Paul Chaka Moynihan, a lot of time. And I imagine that Paul doesn't just sit around between races where he's very, very good in the garage and the pit wall. I imagine he does think, talk, have some input on where they're going with the car. And because of that, I imagine Pierre strikes me as a guy that listens to people as distinct from dominates them, and he's not autocratic. And I suspect, and I think Mekis will make sure that that is the case as well if it's getting out of hand. And so long as there are enough water cooler chats on a Monday circa 3 p.m. about the previous day's race, I think Pierre's okay. But it's quite clear that this car, forget about the PU, this car is not as aerodynamically efficient as even a McLaren, certainly not a Ferrari, or absolutely not as a Mercedes. And it's not far away from McLaren and Ferrari. Might be better in a couple of areas now, chassis-wise, but I don't think it's a lot better. And because even Max has trouble with tyre deg most races now on heavy fuel, and that's always a sign that he's getting more out of the car than the car wants to give to him. So is there a next Newey or Rob? Never hear about it. We're talking about Rob Marshall, I guess, are we? And what a great job he's done at McLaren. Obviously one of Adrian's proteges. Well, I think there are out there. And Adrian, can you have Adrian's anymore? Because Adrian's lifeblood is all the things he's done and the arrows and lances he's thrown at the establishment and created new aerodynamic shapes and effects perfectly and beautifully. But those opportunities are no longer there because of the way the regulations are worded. So if there was another Adrian there, and he really was another Adrian, just as talented as Adrian sits down with him and thinks, wow, I didn't know that, unbelievable. If this guy exists, and let's say he's 28 years old and he's fresh out of college and he's very, very good, as Adrian was right at the beginning of his career, how is he going to show that? All he's going to be is a part of a team in a Grand Prix operation like Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, Red Bull. And yes, he might push here but he might upset a few people. It's very political in all these Formula One teams now. And there's much less scope aerodynamically because of all the cost-cutting regulations on wind tunnel and CFD. Quite difficult for the next Adrian Newey to prove his worth. And that's why, because there's so many committees now. That's why, and the rules are far too oppressive for an Adrian to do what he did at Leighton House or did at Williams or McLaren or Red Bull, in all those ways. Sad, isn't it? Wellen Vids. How are the individual pit stop green lights controlled? Are they done via 4 green wheel guns or by a mechanic? Intrigued. Is it such an intense action pressing the green on time? Thanks, Goat. I don't know. I've no idea. I'm going to have to ask Mark Slade that next time we chat. He'll probably know. Well, I'm sure he will. I would imagine it's done by. I would assume it's done by the guy at the front of the car, isn't it? He waits for the guns, all four guns to go green, and then he does his own thing to release the car. I would imagine it's that, but I need to confirm that. We didn't have those lights in my day at Williams, on the guns, that is. And our thing was put the guns in the air, clear of the wheel when you'd done your job. And what went wrong in 91 Portugal was that when we did have a problem with a cross thread on a nut, the mechanic took out the gun to get his hand in there to try and solve the problem. And when the mechanic at the front of the car, I'm not going to mention any names, saw the gun coming out, he said, "Oh, that's done." And then all I was doing, I was on the lollipop, and all I did was watch the guy at the front of the car. And the minute he gave me the okay, then I had a look at the traffic and see what it was like. I was a traffic control officer. And of course, that's why the wheel came off, because he wasn't clearing. And that's why today that wouldn't happen, because you wouldn't have the green gun, the light green on the gun, if you were having to take the gun out and put another nut in or whatever it was going to be. Tobacco Road, TWG stock has dropped from 376 to 275 since the beginning of Formula One and IndyCar. What is TWG? I'm showing my unbelievable ignorance here. What is TWG? Is this? I've got to find out what TWG is. Why didn't I know that? I suppose because I never really care about all this business stuff. TWG Group. TWG Global, multinational investment holding group. Is that the group that owns Liberty? I don't know. On the assumption that it is. I don't know. Those guys on Wall Street and their bagels need to think again. Getting Audi in didn't solve the problem. Is it a problem? Still seems they're going to make a lot of money, doesn't it? I don't know. Red arrows over my head, that sort of stuff. Ross Brawn is working with MotoGP. Well, like a lot of these good people. I mean, Herbie probably got him in there because Herbie's been doing MotoGP for a long time, isn't he? Herbie Blash. And come on, Ross, we need you there, mate. You and I'll run MotoGP now. It'd be fun. Yeah, so there you go. Good on him. Not quite sure how many races he'll do. The fishing, salmon. Well, not only salmon, just fishing in general. I think he lives right on a river, doesn't he? Literally goes under his house, I think, something like that. Ross is into his fishing. CCU7BV. Hi, Peter. Kimi is definitely fast and talented, but how do you see it from a temperamental and mental point of view? Excellent at the moment. And I think if it was going to start showing, it would be now, wouldn't it? I was trying to think if he's had any sort of... I mean, there was a moment when they were on hards before Stroll went off, when Bono was saying, we're in a pit stop window's coming up, Kimi, what would you like? Softs? Do you think we can go to softs? And Kimi, I think probably half heard the message, said, I don't want to stop, these tires are okay. In a fairly sort of, but not in a pejorative way. It's just like, well, why would you want to put me on softs? I'm happy on the hards. Ferrari, Charles Leclerc, leave him out there in brackets. So what else was there? No, he went through the whole Monaco weekend. Everything was, there were no issues at all about anything. So he's not inclined to sort of even Isaac Hadjar histrionics. He doesn't seem to be that emotional. He seems to be very organized himself, balanced, well balanced, respectful, I think. I talked about on the live stream, actually, I was a bit shocked at Brandon Badoer when he was leading the Formula 3 field behind the safety car. He went on to win the race. son of Luca Badoer, ex-Ferrari guy. Well, currently probably still there, I think. And his engineer got onto the radio and said quite correctly, I think, uh, remember at the restart that it's only going forward. It's very difficult for people to overtake there. Don't worry about gaps. Just focus on the road in front, do the job and enjoy. Which I thought was quite a good message, really. It's sort of, just relax. You're in great shape. And he snapped back saying, I know what I'm doing, mate, or something like that. I just thought, what a petulant little kid. Pathetic. And that's the sort of thing I don't think Kimi would say. I'm sure he wouldn't. He just doesn't seem to have that in him. He's not that sort of person. He's a much more respectful person, and everything seems to happen in its own time and way with Kimi, which is very nice. Very nice. Trail break 3. Norbert was spotted at the Monaco Grand Prix. Good. I'm glad he got a pass. I only say that because I don't know how many people know this, but Dan Gurney's sister-in-law was married, I don't know if she still is, to Norbert Haug. And not once in the last decade of Dan's life, or indeed 2 decades of Dan's life, did he ever get an invitation to go to a race or even to have a free pass to go to a Grand Prix. And Dan, of course, being Dan, was never, ever going to ask anybody for a pass. And I always thought that was incredible. I'm not saying that was a vindictive thing from Norbert. I think it was more, there's too much going on. I haven't got time to think about Dan Gurney, which is a great shame because everybody should think about Dan Gurney at least once every day of their life. I was thinking about Dan this morning when I heard about that unbelievable drone thing that rescued the American helicopter pilots yesterday. Massive, great drone. Thinking, I wonder how many bits on that drone were made by all American racers, carbon bits. Probably quite a lot, I should think. Monaco Road. Remember when Kimi wrecked in Australia last year and Toto on the radio witty him after? He's definitely Toto's pet project. Yeah, but when you got a young guy and you believe in him 100% and you give him an opportunity and you're in a position to give him an opportunity in a team like Mercedes, and you very quickly, after a year of standing around doing nothing, you put him in the race car and he has a shunt or two. What do? For me, he was always going to have a few shunts because he hadn't been driving very much. And I think if you've made that decision, you then support the driver. And I don't think Toto did anything incorrect or out of the ordinary there at all, any more than, not that I did it very often, but if I think about, for example, Imola 1981, when Nigel went off on Friday, I think, and Colin was on the pit wall and sort of slammed the pit bull down, the clipboard, and not again, sort of thing, and everyone was by then was kind of exposed to the sort of English journalist thing of Mansell's got no talent, he keeps crashing the cars, and he's never going to make it, sort of thing. And when Nigel got back to the pits, I said to him, what happened, Nigel? And he explained it, that there was some debris there when he was braking. He was right on the limit. The car wasn't very good anyway, but also whatever it was. And I remember I put my arm around him and said, look, it happens to everybody. Don't worry about it. Just put it behind you, move forward. And that's the only way you can be with young guys. And I'm not saying I was the equivalent of Toto Wolff, I guess, at that point, but Nigel, I think, listened to me like a brother, and he did. And that's what you do. You don't shout and scream at people and say, that's the end. I'm going to support George Russell now. You've crashed the car. So I don't think it was pet project. He's just, well, he is a pet project, but I think Toto's handled him incredibly well, as per the results we're seeing. Other super chats here. Got that one. That was about Adrian. Okay, it's another one from Babish Chandra. Do you think Christian should be back? Miss him in some regards. The car feels under-engineered time to time. Christian Horner, I guess you're meaning, not Christian Fittipaldi. I don't see how Christian Horner would help at all with the engineering of the car. I don't think that would be, unless, as I said before, if Christian Horner sat down in the Pizza Express in Milton Keynes with Adrian Newey and said, "Look, Adrian, forget this rubbish. Come back to Red Bull. I'm going to go back to Red Bull. Let's start again. We'll do this properly." And they then went to Mateschitz Jr. and said, "Right, Adrian Newey's coming back. Christian Horner's coming back. This is the package. We're going to do it." I think they'd do it. And I think they'd do very well in the not the immediate, but certainly medium term. But that's how Christian can make an impact engineering wise. Otherwise, I don't think he would have any impact at all, any more than if he went to Ferrari or anywhere else. It's got to be a package that you bring. And when he went to Red Bull, when he was invited to go to Red Bull from running his own Arden F2 team, it wasn't that. Of course, Christian's a very good man manager and a very intelligent person, a very nice person, and understands motor racing. But he couldn't have done that if he didn't have the ability to get Adrian Newey to go with him and to run Adrian and get the budget to run Adrian to keep Adrian happy for all those years. That was the talent. It wasn't Christian himself and his unbelievable managerial skills. It was that he had these ability to see what he needed in all these parts of the team. So, yeah, a good guy, but I don't think he's on his own necessarily going to do very much. Andrew Ladd, with the reduction of regen, the rear brakes have gone from locking up to not doing enough, as they are such small calipers and pistons. Hybrid systems have no place in real cars. Yeah, I mean, the rear brakes basically don't do anything apart from Monte Carlo, on circuits like Monte Carlo. That's the problem, isn't it? And that's why I guess there were issues in Charles' mind at Monaco. As I say, I think he's overreacting, but maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong in a way. Like, I'd love to see Charles go very well, but I think Charles is the sort of driver that would really like the feel of the Brembo calipers. Lewis says, "I'm quite interested to see where Formula E is going, to be honest. Gen 4 car looks proper and gives F1 an even better excuse to ditch the electric because another category is doing it better." Yeah, well, I guess from Formula One's perspective, Formula E doesn't exist because they've never really done anything there, and it was set up in opposition to Formula One, basically, not in any way to compete with Formula One, but it was then used as a tool by Jean Todt, who much too early in Formula E's life gave it the FIA commercial rights stature and allowed it to go out and compete then against Formula One with its own television and everything else. And that's where Formula One missed the boat. And that's where we're in all this trouble today. Because if Formula One had adopted Formula E then and made it part of its envelope in the way Formula 2 Academy and Formula 3 and Porsches are, and we always had a Formula E race at a Grand Prix weekend, and the teams bled their engineering into the Formula E cars so that everybody was happy about saving the planet, but at the same time we had a great show to put on, we'd be in wonderful shape, wouldn't we? None of this would be going on. But because they didn't, because Jean Todt and Bernie fell out about that, well, that was the weaponry. That's how they weaponized the falling out. Then that's why we're in the mess we are today. But you're right, Formula E doing a good job with that Gen 4. Billadelli, what are your thoughts on Montoya saying in the post-race, "Yeah, it was easy for Kimi. Once you win 4 in a row, the wins start coming easily." Well, why didn't Montoya do that? That's all I'd say. We didn't win 4 in a row, did he? I don't know. Wasn't the same Montoya that said that Max had it easy somewhere as well? It's too easy for Max. Easy. Oh, it was Miami, I think. It was easy when Max did that amazing spin. Oh yeah, easy. I mean, Montoya. I like Montoya, for what he is, but I'm not sure he knows what he's looking at when it comes to other drivers because he can only relate it to himself. And if you want a Liam Lawson type driver, it was Juan Pablo Montoya. Massively long corners, great car control, wonderful ability for braking and power application when the car was right and had a lot of grip and he could feel the left rear, the loaded rear. Great driver, but he wouldn't have a clue, I wouldn't have thought, how Kimi drives. Or how either Kimi, for that matter. I don't think he had a clue how Kimi Raikkonen drive, let alone Kimi Antonelli. So I don't think you should take. I don't know where he said that anyway, but I don't think you should take. I think you should take whatever he says with a very, very large dose of chili. Max Flashart, yes, Leonardo Fornaroli driving Lando Norris FP1, absolutely. Max. Do you think we should get a Leonardo T-shirt going as well? Bring back Make corners great again with Leonardo Fornaroli. That'd be a good one. Andrew Ladd, with Charles and Lance, know they hit the loose tarmac. However, they were struggling with brake retardation and feel it contributed to their woes, so that's why they didn't feel responsible. Well, yeah. But they didn't have a lot of grip anyway. And that's, you know, that's a function of how Monaco was with the brakes. It was a very circuit specific problem with the brakes because the rear brakes were actually having to do a bit of work for a change. And maybe at Aston Martin, they didn't get their head around that. And equally, from Charles' point of view, because of other things that were going on in the way he was on the limit of the car and already had blown qualifying and the penalty thing where he wasn't given P2 and all the other stuff, you know, yeah, I think it was an issue, but I don't think it was an issue to the point where he needs to take it out of the Monaco context into the rest of the season now. He had no grip. That was it. From his perspective, by his standards, he had no grip. But he should have missed it and kept on the inside like everybody else. And he didn't, because he was absolutely on the edge emotionally because of everything that happened. Piastri was ahead of Lando and 106, 34 points. Okay, it's 50 odd, 60 odd now. So it's half the distance that Antonelli now has over, thanks for that, PH. So it's half the distance that Antonelli now has over George. But I don't think it's over. I really don't think it's over. And I've got to say that in a way, haven't I? Because Cameron put me on the spot a couple of weeks ago and said, who do you think will be world champion at the end of the year, Peter? In his very slow, dramatic way. And I eventually said George. But I think that was before my Canada and Monaco. But no, George will come back. Absolutely for sure. Don't have any doubt about it. George will win some races. He'll probably win the British Grand Prix, I should think. And I think he'll win Austria. As I say, if he doesn't win Austria or Silverstone, okay, then I might go down the whole Kimi thing. Menace won the GOAT. Can Lewis win the title with engine upgrades? Well, that's a good question, isn't it? I'm just looking at the watch because I've got to be there at 3, I think. Can he? Let me just look. I just want to check what time I'm supposed to be at the old physio today. What are we looking at here? And yeah, it's 3 o'clock. It's all right. So I need to leave here by 2. I'm fine. Can Lewis win the title of the engine upgrades? Interesting point. Everybody's assuming that now Ferrari got 2 upgrades, that all these upgrades are always going to work anyway. They don't always work on the cars, do they? I mean, you couldn't say that all these upgrades they've had at McLaren since the start of the year, where were they at Monaco? So people just got this obsession about upgrades. It must be an upgrade because it's called an upgrade. It's development. That's the proper word for it. And sometimes development goes the wrong way. Anyway, with more power, Ferrari will never have more power than Mercedes, I don't think, even with their 2 upgrades compared with Mercedes 1. And that's because I don't think their car will be as good as the Mercedes car chassis. So answer no. I don't think he can. I think it'll be one of the 2 Merc drivers. Max was chasing down a 104 gap last year. Yeah, he got quite close, didn't he? Okay, so still a long way to go, and George could easily still do it. Tamaka Road, maybe Herta will get a Formula FP1 drive sometime. Nice fat tyres and no turbo lag. Yeah, I was a bit disappointed with Colton Herta watching him at Monaco. It's quite long corners and quite nothing Isaac Hadjar about him, as much as you can see that in Formula 2. He was going quite well out of position towards the end, leading a group, and he was just very wide. And it's a shame, isn't it? Because Brian Herta, his dad, is a great believer in Rob, and I know he did some work with Rob Wilson, and it's odd that he hasn't done anything since he came over here in Formula 2, because he definitely needs to. If he's going to get into that car and beat well, just be a Isaac Hajar. He needs to shorten his corners. He needs to be softer, less spiky. All those things. He's very reflexy and reactionary and car controlly. All of which are good, but it's not finessey. But Max can put a Haas on pole. Really, I doubt it. I doubt it very much. Bernard Kane, love your work, Peter. My question: do you think George has the requisite maturity to win the championship over Kimi? He's obviously fantastic wheel to wheel, but I can't shake the memory of Singapore 2023. Requisite maturity to win the championship over Kimi. Yeah, I do. I think George is a racer, and I think he understands racing, and I think he's got a great feel for Mercedes and Toto and not making it too ridiculous. So if it came down to wheel, they both got a chance to win the championship going into the last race. I think does George have the requisite maturity? Yeah, if he gets himself in that position. That's a big question as to whether he would. But that was Max doing it with upgrades. Anyway, not quite sure what all that was. Max Flashheart, cool, was having a discussion about McLaren with someone, was off the top of my head. Okay, I'm going to have to wind it up fairly soon, guys, because I've got another call I've got to do. I just remembered. Wow, there's a lot of questions I haven't got through in my usual inefficient way. Sorry about that. Sashin says, looks like Lewis is more settled with his engineering team, while Charles and Botsy seem stuck. As a big Leclerc fan, wonder how much work he puts in behind the scenes. Charles, yeah, he will. Yeah, he'll put in a lot of work. He'll be putting in a lot of work. Yeah, I'm not. Brian Botsy, to me, he's definitely not a Mark Slade. He's definitely not a Bono or a GP. But he's got his own things, and he he's very good in some ways. I don't know. I don't know enough about that. Actually, how much Charles puts in. Lewis definitely is doing a good job at the moment, no doubt about it. But I don't think Charles is going to be far away from him in the next few races. I think he'll probably be ahead in a couple of them as well. So I personally don't see the Charles thing as a major issue. Although, as I've said, I think it's a mistake to start playing around with the brakes as he is. That's just my opinion. PR probably wouldn't allow for number two contracts. Well, you don't have to make them public, do you? Well, obviously you do certain points of it, but you can have another contract, which is an agreement, handshake, whatever it is. So there you go. Peter, do you think Russell is more talented than Norris? It depends what you mean by talented. I don't want to, I don't want to be too, I don't want to sidestep the question by saying that. But natural talent, I would say Lando has more natural talent than George, a little bit. I think George makes up for it in other areas, like his competitive instinct and his grit and determination. Not that Lando doesn't have those. I'm just talking about very subtle differences in character, really. But I think in terms of sheer flair and God-given talent, I think Lando has more than George. Kimi can drive George off the track like George did to Kimi. Anyway, there's a lot of this going on. Alex says, I think the gap between Kimi and Max wouldn't be minimal at all in the same car. Max is already fighting for poles in his Red Bull. Yeah, but I'm not sure that translates into Max being a second lap quicker than Kimi in a Mercedes. So two different things. But that's your opinion. I don't agree with you. I think it'd be very close if Max was at Mercedes. I think Max, assuming they didn't take all these points in one another by crashing into one another in the first corners, and they all finished all the races based on how quick they were, I think Max would beat him. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think it'd be a walkover by any means. Right. Let's have a look at some others. I feel sorry, Kevin says, I feel sorry for McLaren with 2 engine problems that retired Lando. If it's failed again, will Zach take action against it? And it wouldn't. And what would be that? No, he can't. He's lucky to be a Mercedes customer, and what actions are you going to take? These engines have failed, and get them rebuilt, please. This is motor racing. You can't guarantee reliability, and there's no way in the world. I mean, let's say you wanted to take it to court or something. Every engine in every car is installed differently. So how could possibly you win any sort of battle there? No, you just have to be very lucky that you've got a customer deal with the best engine in Formula 1. Oh, sorry, the second best engine in Formula 1. No, but let's call it the best because it is. And he's done very well with that Mercedes deal, even though it cost him a fortune in the first couple of years to get rid of Honda. So where we go. Right. Paul Snowden says, I've followed Formula One since 1970, going back to the Jochen Rindt year, but I have to say now that I don't care if I miss a race or two. Too much manipulation in there for me, and I can't see that changing anytime soon. No, it ain't going to change, I'm afraid, Paul. That is what it is. That's the way Formula One, it's the way the world is, actually. I mean, look at Live Golf compared with the PGA Tour as a good example. Everything's become very contrived and packaged and instantly whatever, instantly penalizable, if that's the right word. I'm going to have to end on this last question, which looks like a great question because, oh no, there's a couple of other mentions of the great Jim Clark. Enough of this. Another random tale on Jim Clark, please. Thanks. And Clark is the best Formula One driver of all time, Chris Meadows. Thank you. Okay, here's my random tale. In 1966, in the Tasman series in Sydney, the Ray Parsons run Lotus 39 was garaged overnight at the Leo Gagan, Pete Gagan family Lotus garage. Well, actually in their back garden, very near the Gagan garage. They were the Lotus dealers, and Pete and Leo were very fast racing drivers as well. And that's where the car was. And as a result, Jimmy got to know the Gagan brothers very well. And they were both very fast racing drivers, and got on with them very well, and all hung out together. Frank Maddich in there too. And anyway, on I think it was something like the Thursday before Friday practice at Warwick Farm, Jimmy drove over to the Gagan house in Liverpool in Sydney to hang out with Leo Leo, I think. They were going to go water skiing or something, and they were going to go together. He drove up there and knocked on the door, and he's wearing shorts and his short sleeve shirt. And Leo's mum answered the door and said, "Oh, good, you're a bit late. I'm glad you're here anyway. The lawnmower's over there, and you can see the grass is all bloody overgrown already, isn't it? Now get on with it." Thinking Jimmy was the lawnmower. And Jimmy actually laughed and did go and look for the lawnmower. And Leo arrived and found Jimmy sort of fussing around in the potting shed trying to find the cable for the lawnmower or the starter for the lawnmower. That's my Jimmy Clark story for the end of this one. So many more questions. They're coming in very quickly, I know. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to go because I got this other call I've got to take and I've got to get on. And it's been 2 hours, so there you go. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being a part of this. Lovely. A lot of fun, isn't it? And looking forward to another one. Anyway, looking forward to the Spanish Grand Prix. Sorry, the Barcelona-Catalunya Grand Prix in Barcelona, that lovely circuit. And I'll be doing the usual videos. And I'll be doing the live stream again during the race for members only. Thanks to everybody who supports that and became a member early on and recently become members. Thank you so much. And love others to join as well. Please do. The more, the better. And it's very easy to do so. Just press that join tab below our videos. So big thanks for all of that. And in the meantime, thanks for being part of this show. See you soon.